Welcome back to Miss Max Academy. We're in Chapter 19, Quiz A, question number 1. Let's take a look at the prompt. A statistics professor asked her students whether or not they were registered to vote. In a sample of 50 of her students, randomly sampled from her 700 students, 35 said they were registered to vote. Question 1. Find a 95% confidence interval for the true proportion of the professor's students who are registered to vote. Make sure to check any necessary conditions and to state a conclusion in the context of the problem. So let's start by checking our conditions. We're going to start with our check for independence, which is also known as the 10% condition. So here's our 10% condition. Oh, it was there. Hold on. Let's see. Why do we have everything? There we go. So our check for independence, or our 10% condition, 50 is less than 10% of the 700 students. Okay, so now we've checked for independence. We now need to check for normality. And we know our check for normality would be n times p is greater than 10, and n times 1 minus p is greater than 10. And here we go. N is 50. That is our sample, the number of students in the sample. P would be 35 divided by 50, which is the proportion of people who said they voted. So 35 divided by 50 is 0.7, and we see 50 times 0.7 is greater than 10. 35 is greater than 10. And then 1 minus p would be 1 minus 0.7, or 0.3. And 50 times 0.3 is also greater than 10 because 15 is greater than 10. So since all of our conditions for inference have been met, we can now create the confidence interval for this problem. So again, let's just check our information here. We've got, and we know that this is a p hat because it's a sample. So our p hat is 35 divided by 50, which is 0.7. And then 1 minus p hat would be 15 divided by 50, which is 0.3. And our population is 50 students out of her total of 700 students. Okay, so let's talk about a confidence interval. We know that the confidence interval will be p hat plus or minus the critical z times the standard error of p hat. So we need to first find the standard error of p hat. We call it a standard error because we are using a sample statistic, not a true population proportion. Okay, so its standard error would be 0.7 times 0.3 divided by n, and we take the square root of that value. So when you find the standard error, just please keep this in your calculator. It's 0.7 times 0.3 divided by 50. Take the square root of that value. And rounded to the nearest thousandths, you get 0.065. But just store that number in your calculator. It'll help us get an exact value as we answer this question. So again, let's talk about a confidence interval. A confidence interval is always in the form of p hat plus or minus the critical z times the standard error of p hat. Well, we have the standard error of p hat, we have p hat, and we know we want a 95% confidence interval. Our critical z for a 95% confidence interval is 1.96. And if you have any question regarding this number, please see me, or please ask in class. So now we have 1.96 times the standard error. So our standard error is in our calculator. We're just going to hit times 1.96. Okay, and we roughly get 0.127. So we're going to have p hat plus or minus 0.127. So again, take a minute and please find this. 0.7 plus 0.127 and 0.7 minus 0.127. And we get a confidence interval of 0.573 to 0.827. Well, what does that mean in context of this problem? It means that we are 95% confident that between 57.3% and 82.7% of the professor's students are registered to vote. Let's say that again. In context of this problem, we are 95% confident that between 57.3 and 82.7% of the professor's students are registered to vote. Okay, tune in again for the next session of Miss Max Academy.